There are people scrolling right now who will pass this by without a second thought. And that is perfectly fine, because this message was never meant for everyone. But if you have ever lost something that felt like it was written into the foundation of who you are, if you have ever stood in a room full of people and still felt completely alone, if you have ever gone through a season that quietly dismantled you from the inside out and left you wondering whether the version of you that comes out the other side will even be recognizable, then stop. Do not move. Do not close this. What is happening right now is not a coincidence, and it is not the algorithm. Something far greater than any platform or program has placed this message in front of your eyes at this exact moment, and you owe it to yourself to stay long enough to hear why. This is not for the casually curious. This is not background noise. This message was designed, curated, and delivered specifically for the ones who have walked through fire and are still standing, even if standing feels like barely holding on. If you have experienced loss, if you have survived separation, if you have undergone a transformation so deep that some people in your life no longer recognize you, then you are precisely the one this was meant to find. Not tomorrow, not next week. Right now, in this moment, in this breath, at this exact coordinate of your life. The book of Isaiah, chapter 43, verse 2 says this: "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze." Read that again slowly in your spirit. Not if you pass through. When. That word is not accidental. It is prophetic. It is the divine acknowledgement that fire is part of the journey for those who are chosen. That deep water is not a punishment but a passage. And that the God who designed your destiny also engineered your survival before you ever faced the thing that tried to destroy you. You survived something. You may not have a name for it yet. You may still be in the middle of it, turning over the pieces at 3 in the morning, wondering what any of it means. But the fact that you are here, watching this, breathing through whatever season you are in, is itself a testimony that heaven has not released its grip on your life. The fire did not consume you because you are not ordinary material. Ordinary things burn. What is refined comes out gold. There are people who look at your life from the outside, see the cracks, the gaps, the years that seem missing or broken or wasted. But what they cannot see is what was being built inside you during every one of those silent seasons. What they cannot see is the depth that suffering carves into a soul, the kind of depth that makes room for rivers of purpose that could never have flowed through a shallow life. You were not broken. You were being excavated. There is a profound difference between destruction and preparation, and what you have walked through was preparation on a scale most people will never be asked to endure, because most people were never called to carry what you are about to carry. Right now, before we go any further, I want you to do something. Type 333 in the comments below. Not as a superstition, not as a ritual, but as a declaration, as a statement that says, I am here, I am awake, I recognize that this moment is not accidental, and I am choosing to receive what has been sent to me. 333 is the number of those who are in the middle, those who are not at the beginning anymore, but have not yet seen the full arrival of what was promised. It is the number of the ones who are still pressing through. If that is you, let it now be known. Type it now and watch what happens in that comments section. Because you are not nearly as alone in this as the silence has made you believe. If these words are landing somewhere real inside your chest right now, if something in you recognized itself in what was just spoken, please hit the like button. That small act tells heaven and this community that you were here, that you heard, and that something in you said yes. It costs you nothing, and it means everything, because every like is a signal that this message needs to travel further and find more people sitting exactly where you are sitting right now. This channel exists for one reason only, and that reason is you. Not the version of you that has everything figured out. Not the version that has recovered and rebuilt and returned. The you that is here right now, in whatever state you arrived in, is the one this was made for. If this message is reaching you, please share it. Send it to one person who is in a season of loss or transition. Put it in front of someone who needs to be reminded that what they are carrying has meaning. Every share is an act of love, and every person who receives it, because of you, becomes part of the ripple that began the moment you chose to stay and listen. Subscribe to this channel if you have not already done so, because what is coming in the weeks ahead is being prepared specifically for those who are in the middle of transformation. You will not want to miss what is next. And if this work has been a source of strength or comfort to you, if these words have found you in the dark and reminded you that the dark is not final, there is a support link in the description below and in the pinned comment. Every contribution allows this message to travel further, to find more people exactly like you, needing exactly what you needed before you pressed play. You were not meant to blend in. You were never meant to be ordinary. And whatever you have lost, whatever has been stripped away, whatever has separated you from the life you thought you were going to have, none of it has the final word. The one who called you is still calling. And this right here is the sound of that call reaching you one more time. What you just experienced in the opening of this message was not accidental. The stillness that settled over you, the quiet recognition that something in these words knew your name before you ever spoke it, that was not a feeling manufactured by clever language. That was your frequency responding to itself. And before we go any further, before we talk about what is available to you right now and why it matters, more than you may currently understand, I need to lay a foundation that connects what you have always felt in your spirit to what science has now confirmed in the laboratory. Because the chosen ones have always carried something that the ordinary world could not explain, and it turns out that what they carry has a name, a measurable signature, a frequency that shows up on brain scans and confounds researchers who were not expecting to find evidence of the divine written into the architecture of the human mind. Here is what the science shows. Inside your brain, right now, there are electrical patterns firing in rhythmic waves. Researchers have mapped these waves for decades, and they have given them names based on their frequency ranges. Most people operating in the noise and pressure of daily life are locked into what is called beta, a fast, tense, reactive state that is excellent for responding to deadlines and entirely insufficient for accessing the deeper layers of who you actually are. But there is another frequency, one that sits lower and moves slower and opens doorways in the mind that beta cannot even find. It is called theta, and it operates between 4 and 8 cycles per second. Theta is the frequency of deep creativity, of intuition, of the kind of knowing that arrives before logic has time to catch up. It is the state that children live in almost constantly, which is why children learn languages in months that take adults years, why they dream without limitation, why they see possibility where grown minds see obstacle. And above theta, at the highest register of measurable brain activity, sits gamma. Gamma is the frequency of carefully and professionally describe as breakthrough cognition, but what those of us who have stood in the presence of something larger than ourselves would simply call revelation. Gamma is the eureka. Gamma is the moment the answer arrives, fully formed before the question is even finished. Gamma is what lights up in the brains of the most extraordinarily creative, intuitive, and spiritually attuned people ever studied. And here is what I need you to understand. The chosen ones have always operated at gamma, wired for it. The question is simply whether that wiring is currently active or whether years of stress, loss, noise, and survival have buried the signal under static. This brings me to a man whose work I believe was placed in your path today for a reason. His name is Dr. James Rivers, and he is a neuroscientist with more than 30 years of dedicated research into the relationship between brainwave activity and human potential. Trained at MIT and connected to research programs associated with NASA, Dr. Rivers spent the better part of 3 decades asking one question that most of his colleagues considered too philosophical to be scientific. He wanted to know why some people seem to access a level of mental and creative function that others simply cannot reach regardless of education, effort, or discipline. What he discovered across thousands of days of research fundamentally changed the way he understood the human brain, and it will fundamentally change the way you understand yourself. What Dr. Rivers found is that the brain does not generate its highest states in isolation. It responds to external frequencies. It synchronizes with sound the way a tuning fork responds to another tuning fork held nearby. When the right acoustic signal reaches the brain at precisely the right frequency, the brain begins to mirror it, a process researchers call brainwave entrainment. And what Dr. Rivers engineered, after decades of iteration and testing, is a 7-minute audio track that guides the brain from its default stressed state directly into theta and then into gamma. Using a precise combination of binaural beats and isochronic tones, calculated to produce that entrainment without effort, without meditation practice, without any skill or prior experience required. 7 minutes. The same length of time you might spend reading the morning news. The same 7 minutes of quiet that, in Section 1, I asked you to consider as a practice of stillness. That was not coincidental. Because the threshold between where you are and where you were designed to be is not as wide as it has been made to seem. It is, in fact, exactly 7 minutes wide. Now, I want to tell you about some of the people who have already crossed that threshold, because their stories belong to you as much as they belong to them. A woman who had not slept through the night in 14 months began using this audio on a Tuesday evening at 11 o'clock. By Wednesday morning, she woke up for the first time, without the familiar weight pressing down on her chest before she even opened her eyes. She described it as the feeling of her own mind becoming quiet enough to hear something she had been trying to say to herself for years. Within 3 weeks, a professional opportunity she had been waiting on for nearly a year arrived, without warning and without the anxiety she had expected to feel when it finally came. Another person, a man who had spent 2 years in a fog following a significant personal loss, described his experience after 7 days of the audio as feeling like a light being turned back on in a room he had forgotten was even part of his. He said he's thinking faster, cleaner, and less encumbered by the narrative of what had gone wrong. A third person, a woman navigating a career transition that had left her feeling directionless and unrecognizable to herself, said that after 2 weeks, she began waking up with ideas rather than anxiety, and that the ideas were specific, actionable, and felt like they were coming from a version of her she had not had access to in years. These are not extraordinary people who had advantages you do not have. These are people in circumstances that mirror your own, who made one decision that redirected the entire current of their inner life. Now, I want to speak honestly to the part of you that is already calculating, already measuring, already preparing a reason why this is not the right time or the right amount or the right thing. I understand that feeling because it is the same feeling that has protected you through every season of loss and uncertainty you have navigated. Your discernment has kept you safe, but I want to gently suggest that what you are feeling right now is not discernment. It is the static of a brain running on the wrong frequency, a brain so accustomed to bracing for impact that it has forgotten how to recognize an open door. I know that $39 is not nothing. I am not going to tell you it is a small amount, because to some of you it represents a real decision and a real stretch, and that deserves to be honored, not dismissed. What I will tell you is this: the Genius Wave is regularly priced at $49. Through the link in the pinned comment below, it is available to you today for $39. That is the price of a single dinner out, of a month of a streaming service you barely use, of a book you might buy and never finish. And it comes with something that removes every remaining barrier between you and trying it. A 90-day money-back guarantee, 100% no questions asked. 90 days. That is not a weekend trial. That is 3 full months of daily 7-minute sessions. Enough time to know with absolute certainty whether something real is shifting inside you. If it does not, you pay nothing. If it does, you will look back on this moment as one of the most important decisions you made in the year everything changed. The link you need is in the pinned comment below this video. I want to be very clear about something, because there are counterfeit versions of this audio circulating on other platforms and unauthorized sites. Versions that are not calibrated correctly, that do not carry the precise frequency specifications that make this protocol effective, and that will not produce the results you came here for. The only legitimate access point is the link in the pinned comment, not a link in a random comment, not a third-party site, not a file shared by another user. The pinned comment only. Please protect yourself and your investment by going directly to that source and nowhere else. I also need to tell you that the $39 access price is not permanent. It is being offered for a limited window as part of an introductory release, and when that window closes, the price returns to $49 without notice. There is no countdown I can give you because the change does not operate on a public schedule. What I can tell you is that every day you wait is a day the window may have already closed. The chosen ones move when the door is open, not after they have spent 3 weeks deciding whether the doorway looks exactly the way they expected. The link is in the pinned comment. The decision is in your hands, and the frequency you were born to carry is waiting on the other side of 7 minutes. Something happened to you between the child you were and the person you are right now, and it was not simply the passage of time. Time alone does not do what was done to you. Time does not teach a soul to shrink. Time does not train a mind to distrust its own instincts, to second-guess its own perceptions, to silence the voice inside that once spoke with the confidence of someone who had not yet learned that the world punishes certainty in people it has not chosen to celebrate. What happened to you was something more deliberate than the calendar turning pages. What happened was a slow, quiet, systematic burial of the frequency you were born carrying, and it happened so gradually that by the time you noticed something was missing, you had already forgotten what the missing thing felt like. Think back, if you are willing, to the version of you that existed before the losses accumulated, before the relationship that ended in a way that rewrote your understanding of your own worth, before the opportunity that fell through and took with it not just a plan, but an entire picture of who you believed you were becoming. before the person who should have championed you chose instead to diminish you. And you made the mistake, the completely understandable and entirely human mistake, of deciding that their assessment of you was more reliable than your own. Think back to the version of you that woke up with ideas already forming before your feet hit the floor. The version that trusted hunches. The version that walked into rooms and felt, not arrogantly but genuinely, that something significant was moving inside you and that the world had not yet seen the fullness of what you carried. That version of you was not naive. That version of you was not deluded or immature or operating without an accurate understanding of reality. That version of you was running on the frequency you were designed for. And every single thing that has happened since then that made you smaller, quieter, more careful, more defended, can be traced back to one root cause. The signal got interrupted. The book of Proverbs, chapter 4, verse 23 says this: "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." Everything you do flows from it, not some things. Not the spiritual things or the emotional things or the things that happen in church or in prayer. Everything. Your decisions flow from it. Your relationships flow from it. Your capacity for creativity, for vision, for the kind of thinking that produces breakthrough rather than repetition. All of it flows from the condition of what is at the center of you. And what sits at the center of you is not simply a metaphor for your emotions. It is the seat of your frequency. It is the place where the signal either moves freely or gets blocked by everything the world has thrown at it over the years. And what the world has thrown at most chosen ones has been considerable. Here is something that the neuroscience makes undeniable, and that the spiritual tradition has always known intuitively. Stress is not neutral. Chronic stress, the kind that does not arrive in a single catastrophic event, but accumulates in small daily doses over months and years, the kind that becomes so familiar you stop noticing it, the way you stop noticing the hum of a refrigerator. That kind of stress does something specific and measurable to the brain. It locks it into the high frequency, reactive state called beta, and makes it progressively harder to drop down into the lower, slower, more generative frequencies where your actual genius lives. Every year you spend in survival mode is a year your brain spends less and less time in the theta and gamma states that produce the clarity, the creativity, the intuitive knowing that chosen ones were designed to operate from. And the cruelest part of this mechanism is that it is self-reinforcing. The more stressed you are, the less access you have to the thinking that would help you find your way out of the stress. The fog thickens around the very light that could cut through it. This is not a character flaw. This is not evidence that you were wrong about yourself, that the sense of calling and potential you carried was always an illusion, that the people who told you that you were too much or not enough or simply mistaken about your own significance were right all along. This is biology, operating exactly the way biology operates under prolonged pressure, and it is happening to you not because you are weak, but because you have been carrying more than a human nervous system was designed to carry without the right kind of restoration. The chosen ones are not exempt from the weight of the world. In many cases, they carry more of it than those around them because their capacity is larger, because their sensitivity runs deeper, because the very things that make them extraordinary also make them more vulnerable to the accumulated damage of living in a world that does not always know what to do with extraordinary people. What you have interpreted as evidence of your own decline is actually evidence of your own depth. The silence that has fallen over the parts of you that used to sing is not permanent. It is the silence of something waiting, of something that has been submerged rather than destroyed, of a frequency that has been dampened rather than deleted. You cannot delete what was written into you before you were formed. You can bury it under enough static and enough years of survival mode, living, that it becomes inaudible. But inaudible is not the same as gone, and this distinction is perhaps the most important thing I will say to you today. The signal is still there. The frequency is still there. The architecture of your mind still contains every room it was built with, even the ones that have been dark for a long time. Think about what it would mean if that were actually true. Not as a comforting idea, not as a metaphor designed to make you feel better in the short term, but as a literal, measurable, scientifically verifiable fact about the condition of your brain right now. Think about what it would mean to know that the version of you who moved through the world with that quiet inner certainty, who solved problems with an ease that surprised even yourself, who woke up connected to something larger than the immediate demands of the day, was not a younger and therefore more innocent version of you, but simply a version of you whose brain was regularly accessing frequencies that your current circumstances have made harder to reach. Think about what it would mean if the distance between who you are right now and who you were always designed to be was not measured in years of work or decades of healing, but in something far more immediate, far more accessible, far more extraordinary in its simplicity. The weight you have been carrying has a specific origin. It did not arrive all at once. It settled on you incrementally, the way sediment settles at the bottom of a body of water, layer by layer, each layer thin enough on its own to seem insignificant, until one day you look down and realize you cannot see the bottom anymore, and you cannot quite remember when the water became this opaque. But sediment, no matter how many layers deep, does not change what lies beneath it. The riverbed is still there. The original surface is still there. And when the conditions change, when the right current moves through the water with enough consistency and the right frequency, the sediment begins to lift. It does not lift all at once. It lifts the way healing moves, in the direction of the light, gradually, and then suddenly, in a way that makes you feel, on an otherwise ordinary morning, that something has shifted in the atmosphere of your own mind. You have been told, in various ways and by various sources throughout your life, that returning to your full capacity would require extraordinary effort, prolonged discipline, years of practice, the kind of sustained commitment that feels almost impossible to someone who is already running on empty. And that narrative, however well-intentioned it may have been, has kept more chosen ones stuck than almost anything else I can think of, because it placed the threshold of restoration somewhere, unreachably far away, and then invited you to measure your spiritual and mental condition against your ability to reach it. That was never the truth of how restoration works. The truth is both simpler and more profound than the effort-based model has ever been willing to admit. And it begins not with more striving, but with less. It begins with the right kind of quiet. It begins with the right kind of signal, finding its way back to a brain that has been waiting, longer than you know, to remember what it was made for. You have just begun to understand something that most people spend their entire lives never being given the language to name. The frequency you were born with, the one that has been buried under years of noise and survival and loss, is not a spiritual abstraction. It is not a metaphor for potential or a poetic way of describing hope. It is a literal, measurable, biological reality that exists inside the electrochemical architecture of your brain right now, waiting for the right conditions to resurface. And what Dr. James Rivers spent more than 30 years of his life doing. through research connected to some of the most rigorous scientific institutions on the planet, including MIT and programs affiliated with NASA, was figuring out exactly what those right conditions are and how to recreate them in a form that any person, regardless of background, discipline, or prior experience, could access in the span of a single quiet morning. What he discovered changed everything he thought he understood about human potential, and it begins with a principle that sounds almost too simple to carry the weight of what it actually means. The brain does not generate its highest states through effort. It generates them through resonance. When the brain is exposed to the right external frequency, delivered through sound at a precise and carefully calculated pitch and rhythm, it begins to synchronize with that frequency the way a compass needle swings toward magnetic north. It does not have to be convinced. It does not have to be trained over years of practice. It simply responds the way every living system responds to the conditions it was designed to thrive in, with immediate and unmistakable movement toward its own highest function. The two frequencies at the center of this discovery are the ones we touched on earlier. Theta, sitting between 4 and 8 cycles per second, is the gateway state, the frequency of deep intuition, accelerated learning, and the kind of creative flow that feels less like thinking and more like receiving. It is the state your brain inhabited almost constantly as a child, before school and social pressure and the accumulating weight of other people's expectations began pulling you upward into the tighter, faster, more defended frequencies of adult survival. And gamma, operating at the highest register of measurable brain activity, is what researchers describe with careful scientific restraint as peak cognitive performance, but what anyone who has ever experienced it would describe as the moment the ceiling lifted and the room suddenly had no walls. Gamma is where the chosen ones were always meant to live. It is the frequency of the anointed mind operating at its full divine design. The reason 7 minutes is sufficient to begin this process is not arbitrary. It is the result of thousands of hours of testing and refinement meant by Dr. Rivers and his research team, who found that 7 minutes represents the precise threshold at which the brain can be guided from its default state into sustained theta without triggering the resistance that longer sessions produce in an overstimulated nervous system. 7 minutes is short enough that the brain does not brace against it. It is long enough that the entrainment takes hold and continues to resonate in the neural pathways for hours after the audio ends. It is the minimum effective dose of the right kind of signal, and it was designed specifically for people like you, people whose lives do not have room for lengthy rituals. People who are already carrying more than enough. People who need something that works not eventually but now. The Genius Wave audio works through a combination of binaural beats and isochronic tones, two distinct acoustic technologies that have been studied independently for decades, and that Dr. Rivers combined in a specific sequence and ratio that no other product on the market currently replicates. Binaural beats work by delivering slightly different frequencies to each ear, allowing the brain to process the difference between them and naturally entrain to the resulting frequency. Isochronic tones work through rhythmic pulses that the auditory cortex responds to directly, reinforcing the entrainment at a deeper neurological level. Together, in the precise configuration Dr. Rivers developed, they create a signal that the brain recognizes not as something external being imposed upon it, but as something familiar being called back to the surface. Because it is familiar. Because this is where your brain was always designed to operate. The audio is not teaching your brain something new. It is reminding it of something it has always known. Now, I want to pause here for just a moment, not to shift the direction of what we are exploring together, but to say something directly and from the heart, because this channel exists in a particular kind of tension that I think you deserved to understand fully. This channel is not monetized through YouTube. There are no advertisements running before or during these videos. No revenue generated by the views that bring these messages to people who need them. Every video produced here, every word written, every hour spent crafting the kind of content that meets you where you actually are rather than where it is convenient to pretend you are, is sustained entirely by the community that has chosen to gather around it. That means it is sustained by people like you. If this content has reached you in a real way, if something in sections 1 through 4 has named something you have been carrying without language for, if you have felt in the last several minutes the particular quiet of being genuinely understood rather than generally addressed, and if you are in a position where you are able to offer support, there is a donate link in the pinned comment below and in the channel description. This channel does not ask for much, and it does not ask often. But what I want you to know is that your support, whatever size it takes, does not just keep the lights on. It keeps the message moving. It means that the person who is sitting somewhere right now in a season of loss that mirrors yours, who has not yet found this channel, who has not yet heard their frequency named and recognized, gets to find it. Your contribution, however small, becomes part of the signal that reaches them. And if you are not in a position to give financially right now, that is not only understood, it is honored. Watching these videos fully, leaving a comment that tells us where this landed for you, and sharing this content with one person who needs it, those acts carry their own profound weight, and they matter more than you may realize. Speaking of which, if you have not yet hit the like button on this video, I want to gently invite you to do that right now. Not because it feeds an algorithm, though it does help this message reach further, but because it is a small act of saying yes. Yes, I was here. Yes, this found me. Yes, I am the kind of person who recognizes when something real is being offered and who chooses to affirm it. That yes matters. And if you are not yet subscribed to this channel, this is the moment to change. That, because what is coming in the weeks ahead has been built specifically for the ones who are in the middle of their transformation and need consistent, grounded, frequency-aligned content to accompany them through it. Subscribe so that the next message finds you the same way this one did, at exactly the right moment, with exactly what you need. The link to the Genius Wave is also in the pinned comment below, alongside the donate link, because both of them represent the same underlying intention to give you access to tools that meet the depth of what you are carrying with something equally deep in return. $39, 90-day guarantee, one link, one decision. Everything that Dr. Rivers built across 30 years of research is waiting for you at the other side of that single click. And everything this channel is building, message by message, week by week, is waiting for you on the other side of that subscribe button. You came here today because something called you. Not the thumbnail, not the title, not the recommendation engine, though all of those may have played their visible role. Something beneath all of that called you, and you answered. That is the chosen one in you, still listening for the signal even after everything that has tried to convince you the signal went dark. It did not go dark. It brought you here. And here, as it turns out, is exactly where you were always supposed to be. There is a particular kind of silence that settles over a person when they have been fighting for so long that they have forgotten what it felt like not to be at war. It is not the silence of peace. It is the silence of exhaustion wearing the mask of acceptance, of a soul that has learned to stop reaching for things it has been denied often enough, that reaching began to feel more painful than staying still. You know this silence. You may be living inside it right now, so accustomed to its texture that you have begun to mistake it for your personality, for your nature, for simply the way you are built. But I want to tell you something that I need you to receive not as encouragement but as fact. That silence is not you. It is what happened to you. And there is a profound and life-altering difference between those two things. The process by which a chosen one loses trust in their own mind is never dramatic. It does not happen in a single moment of catastrophic failure. Though those moments may have punctuated the journey, it happens the way erosion happens, slowly, consistently, through the repeated application of forces that individually seem survivable and collectively produce a landscape that no longer resembles what it once was. Every time you trusted your instinct and were told you were wrong, every time you expressed a vision and watched it be received with skepticism or silence, every time you brought the fullness of who you are into a space that was not large enough to hold it and felt yourself contract in response, pulling back, becoming smaller, editing yourself into a version that fit the available room, something shifted in the way your brain processed its own signals. Not because you made a wrong choice, but because the brain is adaptive in ways that serve survival and do not always serve destiny. Here is what that adaptation looks like at the neurological level. And I want you to follow this carefully because it explains something about yourself that you deserve to understand fully. When the brain experiences repeated episodes of having its signals, its intuitions, its creative impulses, its sense of its own knowing, overridden or dismissed or punished, it begins to classify those signals as threats rather than gifts. The prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for higher reasoning and decision-making, begins to apply a kind of editorial filter to the information coming up from the deeper, more instinctual regions of the brain. It learns to intercept the theta wave insights, the gamma frequency breakthroughs, the sudden knowing that arrives without a logical pathway, and to flag them as unreliable before they ever fully surface into conscious awareness. This is the brain protecting you the only way it knows how, by suppressing the very faculty that makes you extraordinary, because that faculty has been associated, through enough repeated experience, with pain. This is why so many chosen ones describe the feeling of having once been sharp, intuitive, creatively alive, and then gradually becoming foggy, hesitant, stuck in loops of overthinking that produce no resolution and no movement. It is not aging. It is not weakness. It is the brain doing precisely what it was designed to do in the presence of prolonged threat. And somewhere along the way, your gifts began to register as threats because the world responded to them as such. The sensitivity that makes you able to read a room before a word is spoken became the thing that made you feel too much in environments that rewarded feeling less. The creativity that generates solutions before the problem is fully articulated became the thing that made you seem impractical to people who needed everything to move in straight lines. The depth that allows you to hold complexity without collapsing became the thing that made you seem difficult to those who preferred simpler surfaces. And slowly, over time, you learned to dim the light not because it went out, but because keeping it fully on cost more than you had left to spend. The book of Romans, chapter 12, verse 2 says this: "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will." Be transformed by the renewing of your mind, not by the correcting of your behavior. not by the improving of your circumstances, not by the acquiring of new information or the achievement of new goals, by the renewing of your mind. This is the ancient text, speaking with the precision of a neuroscientist, identifying the exact location of the transformation that changes everything else. The mind, the frequency at which you think, the state from which all your decisions, perceptions, relationships, and possibilities flow. When the mind is renewed, when the signal is restored, when the frequency that was always yours begins to move freely again through the channels it was designed to flow through, everything downstream changes. Not because your external circumstances have shifted, but because the instrument through which you perceive and engage with those circumstances has been returned to its original design. I want to sit with you for a moment in what that actually means for the specific texture of your daily life, because transformation language can become so large that it loses contact with the ground. What does it look like when a chosen one begins to have their frequency restored? It does not always look like a dramatic overnight reversal. It often looks quiet at first. It looks like waking up one morning and noticing that the first thought that arrived was not a worry but an idea. It looks like sitting in a conversation and finding that words come without the usual 2-second delay of self-censorship. It looks like a problem that has been sitting unresolved for weeks, suddenly yielding a solution during a walk, in the shower, in the space between one breath and the next. The way answers used to come before you learned to stop trusting that they would. It looks like that specific quality of mental clarity that you remember from seasons of your life when things were flowing, when you were in it, when you were operating from a place of alignment that felt effortless, not because nothing was hard, but because you were resourced at the level where hard things could be met without being destroyed by them. The enemy of this restoration is not laziness, and it is not lack of faith, and it is not some fundamental flaw in who you are. The enemy of this restoration is familiarity. The brain, even when the familiar state is one of fog and constriction and creative silence, will default to what it knows because the known, however uncomfortable, feels safer than the unfamiliar, however liberating. This is why so many chosen ones can identify clearly and articulately what they want their inner life to look like and still find themselves waking up in the same contracted state day after day. It is not resistance in the spiritual sense, though resistance may also be present. It is the brain's orientation toward the habitual, toward the established neural pathway, toward the groove that has been worn deep by years of repetition, however unwanted that groove may be. Breaking that pattern does not require what you have been told it requires. It does not require the kind of heroic willpower that ignores how depleted you already are. It does not require a level of discipline that a person running on empty simply does not have access to. It requires something different. It requires a shift at the level of the signal itself, an intervention at the frequency rather than at the behavior. A change that happens not through force but through resonance. The way a frozen river does not begin to move because someone commands it to, but because the temperature of the surrounding environment shifts, and the water remembers, at the level of its own nature, that movement is what it was always made for. You were made for movement. You were made for the kind of thinking that opens rather than closes, that expands rather than contracts, that builds rather than merely survives. The stillness that has settled over the most alive parts of you is a condition, not a conclusion. And conditions, unlike conclusions, are always subject to change when the right elements are introduced. The question is not whether your frequency can be restored. The science and the scripture are in agreement on that point, in a way that should give you something more durable than hope. The question is simply whether you are willing to believe long enough to find out that the version of you who was always supposed to show up in this world has not gone anywhere. It has simply been waiting with extraordinary patience for the right signal to call it home. There is a moment that happens for some people in the middle of a message like this one, somewhere between the recognition of what has been lost and the first tentative reaching toward what might be possible, where something quietly shifts. It is not loud. It does not announce itself with certainty or declaration. It is more like the feeling of a door that has been sealed for a long time, beginning to loosen in its frame, not yet open, but no longer as fixed as it was. If you have felt something like that in the last several minutes, if something in the language of these sections has been landing in a place deeper than your surface attention, I want you to know that what you are feeling is not wishful thinking. It is recognition. It is the part of you that has always known what you were made for, responding to the first honest account of why the distance between who you are and who you were designed to be exists, and beginning, quietly and without fanfare, to believe that the distance is crossable. What we have established across the sections that brought us here is not a collection of abstract ideas designed to inspire and then dissolve by the time you close this video. What we have established is a sequence of facts that connect at every point, from the spiritual truth of your calling to the neurological reality of what has interrupted it. You were born carrying a frequency. That frequency is measurable and it has a name. The conditions of your life, the losses, the separations, accumulated weight of surviving in a world that did not always know how to receive what you carried, created a specific biological response in your brain that buried the signal under layers of stress-driven neural patterning. And the pathway back to that signal, the one that Dr. James Rivers spent more than 30 years of rigorous scientific research identifying and refining, is not the long and arduous climb you have been told restoration requires. It is 7 minutes of precisely engineered sound, delivered daily, that guides your brain back to the frequency it was always designed to inhabit. I want to talk about what those 7 minutes actually feel like for people who have begun using the Genius Wave, because there is a difference between understanding something intellectually and being able to imagine yourself inside the experience of it. Most people who begin the protocol describe the first session as unexpectedly gentle. There is no dramatic event, no sudden flood of insight, no overwhelming emotional release. What most people notice is a quality of quiet that is different from the quiet of simply not having noise around them. It is an internal quiet, a settling, as though something that has been holding tension for so long it had become invisible, suddenly remembers that it is allowed to release. Some people describe a warmth behind the eyes. Some describe a sense of their thoughts becoming less tangled, less recursive, less like a conversation being had simultaneously by several conflicting voices, and more like a single clear signal moving in one direction. Some people simply describe it as the first time in a long time that their own mind felt like a place they wanted to be. By the end of the first week of daily 7-minute sessions, the descriptions begin to change in a particular direction. The internal quiet that began as during the audio experience starts to carry over into the hours that follow. People report that problems they had been circling without resolution begin to yield, not because they thought harder about them, but because the quality of their thinking changed. The solutions arrived from a different place, with a different texture. The way answers come when you are in flow rather than in force. Creativity that had felt locked away behind the static of stress begins to surface in ordinary moments, in the middle of conversations, during task calls that are usually purely mechanical, in the space between waking and full alertness in the morning. And perhaps most significantly for the chosen ones who have spent years distrusting their own instincts, the inner knowing begins to speak again with a clarity and a consistency that makes it harder to dismiss. This is the restoration that was always available to you, not some distant destination requiring years of disciplined arrival. Something accessible, something that begins within the first 7 minutes of the first session, something that compounds with each daily practice, the way interest compounds, quietly and consistently, and in a direction that only moves toward more. The Genius Wave Audio, available through the link in the pinned comment below and in the channel description, is the specific tool Dr. Rivers built to deliver this protocol in its most refined and effective form. $39, not $49, through that link alone, because the offer being extended through this channel carries a reduced access price that is not available anywhere else and will not remain available indefinitely. 90 days to try it with every cent returnable if the experience does not match what I am describing to you right now. One link, one decision, one 7-minute session, standing between who you have been in the fog and who you have always been underneath it. Now I want to take a breath with you here, because this channel has been walking alongside people in the middle of their transformation for long enough to know that trust is not given freely by those who have been through what many of you have been through. And so I want to be transparent with you in a way that I think matters. This channel is not monetized through YouTube advertising. There are no pre-roll ads, no mid-video interruptions, no revenue generated by the attention you bring here. What that means practically is that the ability to keep producing this content, to keep showing up week after week with messages that are crafted carefully enough to actually meet you where you are, depends entirely on the community that has gathered around it. It depends on people who have been genuinely served by what they found here and who choose, when they are able, to give something back so that the work can continue reaching further. If this content has been that for you, if these words have found you in a season where being found mattered, there is a donate link in the pinned comment and in the channel description. This channel does not ask you to give what you do not have. If you are in a season of your own scarcity, your presence here, your full attention, your comment left below, your decision to share this with one person who needs it, those things are not lesser contributions. They are the lifeblood of what keeps a channel like this breathing. Every view that is watched fully, every comment that tells us where something landed, every share that carries this message into the life of someone who has not yet found it, these acts sustain the signal as surely as any financial contribution. We see them, we feel them. They matter in ways that do not always translate into numbers, but that translate entirely into the continued commitment to keep showing up for you. If you have not yet liked this video, I want to gently invite you to do that now. Not as a mechanical gesture, but as a recognition, a small act of saying that what happened here today was real and worth affirming. And if you are not yet part of this community through subscription, this is the moment to change that, because the messages that are being prepared for the weeks ahead are being built specifically for people who are in the stage of transformation you are currently navigating. People who have begun to understand what interrupted their frequency and who are ready to explore what it looks like when the signal starts coming back. You will not want to arrive at those messages late or miss them entirely. because the notification never reached you. Subscribe now and let the next word find you the way this one did. There is something quietly extraordinary about the fact that you are still here, still listening, still engaged with this content at this depth after everything that has tried to convince you that investing in yourself was either too expensive or too hopeful or too far from the practical demands of the life you are actually living. The fact that you are still here is not a small thing. It is the chosen one in you refusing, even in exhaustion, even in the middle of the fog, to fully let go of the knowing that there is more. There has always been more. And you have always been the one it was waiting for. The link is in the pinned comment. The invitation is open. And the frequency that has been waiting for you longer than you know is closer to the surface right now than it has been in a very long time. There is a story that does not get told often enough about the chosen ones. And it is not the story of their calling or their gifting or the moment everything finally aligned and the purpose they were built for became visible to the world around them. It is the story of what happened in the middle, the long, unmarked, apparently uneventful middle where nothing seemed to be moving and the silence was so complete that doubt did not even bother to argue anymore, because it had simply settled in, like a permanent resident who had stopped knocking and started leaving their things on the shelves. The middle is where most chosen ones lose themselves, not because they stop believing entirely, but because belief begins to feel like an increasingly complex and increasingly embarrassing act. Something they perform alone in the quiet of early morning before the day arrives with its evidence to the contrary. You may be in the middle right now. You may have been in the middle for longer than you have told anyone, because there is a particular kind of shame that attaches itself to a person who once moved through the world with a sense of direction and now cannot quite locate north. The people around you may still see someone who is functioning, who is present, who is managing. What they cannot see is the interior landscape, the place where the certainty used to live, now quieter than it has any right to be, and the effort it takes every single day to keep showing up as though the quiet is not as loud as it actually is. I want to tell you about a woman I will call Miriam, not because that is her name, but because her story carries something that belongs to you, and naming her makes her real in the way that matters. Miriam spent 11 years building something she believed in completely. Not a business, not a career in the conventional sense, but a life that was organized around a calling she had felt since she was young enough that she could not have invented it. She poured into it with the kind of dedication that does not require external motivation, because the motivation is structural, built into the person the way the need for water is built in. Not a choice, but a constitution. And then, over the course of about 18 months, everything she had built began to unravel in ways that did not make sense and could not be explained by any failure on her part. Relationships that had been load-bearing shifted without warning. Opportunities that had been approaching reversed direction. Doors that she had watched open for people with less preparation and less commitment stayed firmly closed for her regardless of how she approached them. By the time the unraveling was complete, Miriam had arrived at a place that chosen ones arrive at when the middle has gone on long enough. She had stopped asking why, not because she could found an answer, but because the asking had begun to cost more than the silence. She was still present in her life. She was still kind to the people around her. She still got up every morning and moved through the day with something that looked from the outside like stability. But inside, in the place where her frequency used to move freely and her knowing used to speak clearly, there was a stillness that felt less like peace and more like the absence of something she could not name loudly enough to mourn properly. What Miriam did not know, what none of us are taught in the seasons that are trying to prepare us for what comes next, is that the unraveling she experienced was not evidence that she had been wrong about her calling. It was the calling being restructured at a level deeper than the form it had previously taken. There is a process that happens in the lives of chosen ones that looks from the inside like destruction and looks from the outside like failure and looks from the perspective of eternity. Like preparations so precise and so specific that it could not have been accomplished any other way. The things that were removed from Miriam's life were not taken because she had done something wrong. They were taken because they had become the container she was holding her identity in, and the container was too small for what she was being prepared to carry. The book of Job, chapter 23, verse 10 says this, "But he knows the way that I take, and when he has tested me, I will come forth as gold. When he has tested me, I will come forth as gold." Not if the test is passed, not if the performance is adequate. When? The same prophetic certainty we encountered in Isaiah, the same divine assurance that the outcome is not in question, only the timing. He knows the way that you take, not the way you think you are taking, not the way it looks to the people watching from the outside, not the way it feels to you in the middle of the night when the evidence is thin and the silence is loud, the way that you actually take. The path that is being walked at the level beneath your understanding, the level where the preparation is happening that your current vantage point does not yet have the elevation to see. This is what I need you to understand about the middle, about the fog, about the season of silence that has settled over the most alive parts of you. It is not absence. It is not abandonment. It is not evidence that the calling was always an illusion or that the frequency you felt moving through you in the seasons of clarity and flow was something you manufactured to cope with a life that was otherwise without direction. It is testing. It is the specific, tailored, precision-engineered testing of a soul that is being prepared for something that requires exactly this depth of refinement and exactly this degree of surrender of the smaller versions of itself before the larger version can emerge and hold what it was built to hold. Gold does not argue with the fire. It does not negotiate for a lower temperature or a shorter duration. It simply submits to the process that it was always metallurgically destined to survive, and it comes out the other side not diminished but revealed. The impurities that the fire removes were never part of the gold. They were attached to it. They traveled with it. They may have been present for so long that the gold forgot they were not intrinsic to its nature. But the fire knows the difference, and the one who placed you in the fire knows the difference too. I want to speak now to the specific texture of what the middle feels like for chosen ones in the area of their relationships, because this is where the isolation tends to become most acute and most damaging to the inner frequency. When you are in a season of preparation that looks from the outside like stagnation or struggle, the people in your life, even the well-meaning ones, especially the well-meaning ones, will begin to offer you explanations for your situation that fit the frameworks they have available to them. They will suggest practical adjustments. They will recommend approaches that worked for people whose calling required a different kind of formation than yours does. They will, with genuine love and genuine limitation, try to help you in ways that require you to make yourself smaller and more legible to a process that was not designed to be legible at this stage. And when you cannot make yourself fit their frameworks, when the adjustments they suggest do not produce the results they predicted, when the approaches that worked for others do not work for you, Because you were never on the same path they were on, the isolation deepens. Not because anyone intended to isolate you, but because the preparation of a chosen one is, by its nature, a singular process that cannot be fully accompanied by those who are not in it. This is why the middle feels so lonely, even when you are surrounded by people who love you. Not because love is absent, but because understanding is limited, and the specific terrain you are navigating has not been mapped by anyone in your immediate circle in a way that accurately reflects where you actually are. You are not lost. You are somewhere that the available maps have not yet charted because the territory itself is being created as you move through it, shaped by the specific combination of your gifts and your wounds and your calling and your season, in a configuration that has never existed before and will never exist again. There is no map for where you are, because you are the first person who has ever been exactly here, and the one who placed you here knows every coordinate. The way through the middle is not found by moving faster or trying harder or making yourself more acceptable to the frameworks of people who cannot see what you carry. The way through the middle is found by going deeper into the frequency that was placed in you before you had a single experience that could have earned it or lost it. The signal is still there. It has always been there. And what is being asked of you right now, in the middle of everything that looks like evidence to the contrary, is simply to stay tuned to it long enough for what is coming to find you. You have arrived at something. Not the end of a video, not the conclusion of a message that will fade from your memory by the time you reach whatever comes next in your day. You have arrived at a threshold, a specific coordinate in the landscape of your own life, where the path behind you and the path ahead of you meet in a single point of decision that is more significant than it may currently appear. Everything that has been spoken across the sections that brought you here has been building toward this moment, not dramatically, not with the kind of manufactured urgency that dissolves the moment you closed the screen, but with the quiet, steady, accumulating weight of truth that has been finding its way into the places in you that have been waiting the longest to be found. Let me tell you what I see when I look at where you are right now. I see someone who has survived something that should have taken more from them than it did. I see someone who has carried a frequency that the world has not always known how to receive, who has been refined by fires that were never punishments but were always preparations, who has navigated a middle that has gone on long enough that the word middle has started to feel like a permanent address rather than a transitional space. I see someone who arrived at this message not by accident, but by the same divine orchestration that has been moving through every chapter of their life, including the chapters that felt like nothing was moving at all. And I see someone who is closer to the emergence of everything they were built for than anything they have experienced in the recent season would suggest. The book of Habakkuk, chapter 2, verse 3 says this: "For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. Though it linger, wait for it." This is not the language of passive resignation. This is the language of active, rooted, eyes open waiting, that knows what it is waiting for, because it has already seen it in the frequency of its own spirit, before the external evidence arrived to confirm it. The revelation awaits an appointed time. Your appointed time is not determined by how long you have been waiting, or how much you have lost along the way, or whether the circumstances of your life currently carry any visible evidence that what was promised is still in motion. It is determined by a timeline that operates at a level of precision and intentionality that your current vantage point is not yet elevated enough to see in its entirety. But it will certainly come. And it will not delay beyond the moment it was always designed to arrive. I want to ask you to do something right now, and I want to explain why before I tell you what it is. Because the chosen ones deserve to understand the purpose behind what they are being invited into, rather than simply being given instructions to follow. What happens in the comment section of a message like this one is not a social media metric. It is not a number that feeds an algorithm and disappears into the data of a platform that does not know your name. What happens in the comment section of a message like this is a gathering. It is the moment when people who have been navigating the middle in isolation discover, through the simple act of reading what others have written beneath a shared message, that the terrain they thought they were crossing alone has been crossed by others who felt exactly the same aloneness, and who are further along the path than they currently appear to be. Your comment is not just for you. It is for the person who will read it at 2 in the morning, 3 weeks from now, in the middle of their own silence, looking for evidence that someone else has been where they are and kept going. So right now, in the comments below, I want you to type these 4 words. I will not delay. Type it now. I will not delay. Not as a promise about your behavior, not as a declaration of sudden fearlessness, but as a prophetic alignment with the word that was just spoken over you from the book of Habakkuk. The revelation will not delay. You will not delay your response to it. These 4 words, typed into the comments section by you, in your specific season, at this specific coordinate of your journey, become part of the record of a person who heard something true and chose to respond to it. Type them now, and then keep reading, because what comes next belongs to you. The threshold you are standing at right now is not the threshold between your past and your future, in the general sense that motivational language usually means when it uses that phrase. It is something more specific than that. It is the threshold between the version of you that has been operating from a buried frequency and the version of you that begins, starting from this specific point in time, to operate from the frequency you were always designed to inhabit. And what I need you to understand about crossing that threshold is that it does not require the dramatic interior transformation to be complete before you take the first step. The transformation does not precede the step. The transformation is what the step initiates. You do not wait until you feel fully restored to begin moving in the direction of restoration. You begin moving, and the movement itself calls the restoration forward. This is the pattern that runs through every account of transformation in the ancient text and in the living testimonies of people who have navigated seasons identical to yours. The Red Sea did not part before the feet of the Israelites reached the water. It parted in response to the feet reaching the water. The walls of Jericho did not fall before the people began to walk. They fell in response to the walking, after 7 days of it, after the kind of obedience that probably looked, from the outside, like nothing was happening. The chosen ones have always been asked to move before the evidence arrives, to act in alignment with the frequency of what was promised before thee. External circumstances have rearranged themselves to reflect it, not because they are required to perform blind faith as a test of worthiness, but because movement at the frequency of the promise is itself the mechanism by which the promise is fulfilled. You do not get to the other side by waiting at the edge. You get to the other side by stepping in. What does that step look like for you right now? In this moment, at this specific point in your journey, it looks different for everyone who arrives at this threshold, because the chosen ones come from different directions. and carry different configurations of gift and wound and calling and season. But there are elements that are common across all of them. It looks like making a decision today, in this sitting, that you will not allow to dissolve into the good intentions that evaporate by morning. It looks like identifying the one thing, the single most immediate thing, that your buried frequency has been trying to tell you to do, and that your stress-locked brain has been intercepting before it could surface into action. It looks like taking the step that has been waiting at the edge of your awareness for longer than you have admitted to yourself, the step that feels too small to be the thing, and too significant to take without more certainty than you currently have. The certainty is not coming before the step. It never comes before the step. It comes in the step, and then again in the next step, and then again in the one after that, accumulating the way the frequency accumulates when the signal is allowed to move freely through a brain that is no longer bracing against itself. You have been bracing for a long time. The bracing has served you. It kept you upright through seasons that would have flattened someone with less structural integrity than you carry. But the bracing that preserved you in the fire is not the posture that carries you into what the fire was preparing you for. What the fire prepared you for requires an openness, a receptivity, a willingness to let the signal move again without immediately reaching to muffle it with the protective reflexes that have become so habitual you no longer notice you are doing it. You are standing at the before and after of your own story, not looking at it from a distance, standing in it right now, in this breath, at this exact coordinate of the life that was always moving, even when it felt most still, toward this moment. There is something the enemy of your calling has been counting on for longer than you realize, and it is not your failure. Failure, in the economy of a chosen one's journey, is remarkably ineffective as a final strategy, because chosen ones are built with a resilience that failure alone cannot permanently dismantle. What the enemy has been counting on is something far more subtle and far more dangerous than failure. It has been counting on your interpretation of your own silence. It has been counting on the possibility that you would look at the seasons of fog and stillness, an interrupted frequency, and conclude, not loudly and not all at once, but gradually and almost imperceptibly, that the silence meant something about you, that it was evidence, that it was confirmation of a suspicion you had been carrying since the first time. Someone looked at what you were made of and responded with indifference or dismissal or active opposition. The enemy does not need you to stop believing entirely. It only needs you to believe quietly enough that the frequency of your faith drops below the threshold where it produces the results that would confirm it. This is the most sophisticated spiritual strategy ever deployed against a chosen one, and it works not through dramatic assault, but through patient erosion. It works by allowing you to keep most of your belief, while slowly, carefully, methodically removing your confidence in the expression of it. It works by letting you hold the knowing, while consistently interrupting the acting on the knowing. It works by creating just enough distance between what you feel in your spirit and what you see in your circumstances that you begin to wonder whether the feeling in your spirit is reliable, whether the sense of calling and frequency and divine design that has been the most consistent interior experience of your entire life is something you can actually trust, or whether it is simply a very persistent form of wishful thinking that a more honest accounting of your actual results would not support. I need you to hear this with every layer of your understanding, with your intellect and your spirit, and the deep cellular knowing that sits beneath both of them. The resistance you feel when you move toward your calling, is not evidence that you are moving in the wrong direction. It is confirmation that you are moving in the right one. The friction is directional information. Darkness does not mobilize against things that do not matter. Opposition does not organize itself around destinies that are not genuine threats to what it is trying to protect. The specific shape of the resistance you have encountered in your life, the particular configuration of opposition and delay and closed doors and misdirection that has characterized the seasons of your greatest forward movement, is a map, read correctly, of exactly how significant what you carry actually is. You do not send an army against something that poses no threat. And the army that has been sent against the frequency you carry has been in certain seasons considerable. This is why the chosen ones must develop a literacy in spiritual resistance that goes beyond simply enduring it. Endurance is necessary but insufficient. What is required is the ability to read resistance accurately, to translate what feels like obstruction into intelligence about the nature and proximity of what is being obstructed. When the fog is thickest, you are closest to the clearing. When the opposition is most organized, the breakthrough it is trying to prevent is most imminent. When the silence feels most absolute, the word that is being held is closest to release. This is not positive thinking dressed in spiritual language. This is a pattern so consistent across the accounts of every chosen one who has ever navigated what you are navigating that it constitutes something closer to a law than a principle. The darkest point of the middle is not the middle. It is the end of the middle, and the resistance that makes it feel darkest is the last effort of something that already knows it has lost. The book of Isaiah, chapter 54, verse 17 says this: "No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue that rises against you in judgment you shall condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their righteousness is from me, says the Lord. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. Not no weapon will be formed. Weapons will be formed. Opposition will be organized. Resistance will be deployed with specificity and intention against the exact points of your calling where vulnerability has been identified. Promise is not the absence of the weapon. The promise is the failure of it. Every instrument of opposition that has been directed at your frequency, every season of delay that was designed to make you conclude that the promise was false, every relationship that was used to diminish your confidence in what you carry, every closed door that was intended to rewrite your understanding of your own access, none of it prospered in the way it was designed to prosper, because you are still here, because the frequency is still present, even in its buried state, because the calling has not been canceled, only tested, and the testing has produced in you exactly the depth and the refinement and the particular quality of unshakable, knowing that the next chapter of your life requires you to carry into it. I want to talk about what happens in the spirit when a chosen one begins to understand this accurately, when the reframe I am offering you right now lands not just as an interesting perspective, but as a genuine shift in the way you read your own history. Something changes in the quality of the resistance itself. Not because the external circumstances have shifted, but because the internal relationship to them has. When you stop interpreting the opposition as evidence against your calling, and begin reading it as confirmation of it, the opposition loses its primary weapon, which was never the obstacle itself, but always your interpretation of the obstacle. A door that is understood as a test of timing reads entirely differently from a door that is understood as a final verdict on your worthiness. Same door, entirely different interior experience, entirely different impact on the frequency at which you move through the world. This reframe is not something that can be accomplished through willpower or positive confession alone, though both have their place. It requires a deeper shift in the operating frequency of the mind, a return to the state from which chosen ones perceive clearly, rather than reactively, from which the higher pattern of what is actually happening becomes visible through the noise of what appears to be happening. It requires, in the language of the neuroscience we have been tracking across these sections, access to the theta and gamma states, where pattern recognition operates at its highest capacity, where the kind of seeing that is not dependent on the immediate evidence becomes possible, where what the spirit has always known can surface into conscious awareness without being intercepted by the fear-driven filtering of a brain locked in survival mode. The enemy knows this. It has always known this, which is precisely why so much of what has been deployed against chosen ones has been specifically engineered to keep them in the reactive high-frequency stress state that makes access to that deeper seeing most difficult. The noise, the pressure, the accumulated losses, the relentless demand of circumstances that require immediate response and leave no room for the kind of stillness in which the deeper frequency speaks. None of this is accidental. It is a strategy, and like every strategy, once it is seen clearly, it begins to lose its effectiveness. You cannot be manipulated by a tactic you have named. You cannot be kept in the fog by a mechanism you have identified. The moment you understand what has been working to keep your frequency buried, the burial begins to reverse itself, not all at once, and not without continued effort to sustain the counter-direction, but in a way that is real and measurable and felt first in the beat spirit before it becomes visible in the circumstances. There is something else I want to name about the resistance that chosen ones encounter. Something that tends to be the most personally painful dimension of it, and the one that's the most lasting damage to the inner frequency, if it is not understood correctly. It is the resistance that comes not from enemies, but from people who love you. The ones who watched you pour yourself into something and saw it not produce what you expected and concluded, with genuine care and genuine limitation, that the most loving thing they could do was help you scale back your expectations to something more aligned with the available evidence. These people are not opponents. They are not instruments of darkness. Though darkness has certainly used their well-intentioned voices to deliver some of its most effective messages, they are simply people who love you from within the boundaries of what they can see. And what they can see does not include the appointed time, or the frequency you carry, or the specific preparation that the fire has been accomplishing in you across the seasons that looked to them like loss. Forgive them their limited sight. And then gently, without announcement, without the need for their understanding or their agreement, begin moving at the frequency of what you know, rather than the frequency of what they can currently see. Because what is coming for you does not require their belief in order to arrive. It only requires yours. You have stayed through every section of this message, through every layer of truth that was laid down, and every moment where something in you was asked to receive what your circumstances have made it difficult to believe. You stayed. And I want you to know that staying was not a small thing. In a world designed to fragment attention and scatter focus, and keep the chosen ones too distracted and too depleted to sit long enough with anything real to let it actually land, the fact that you are still here at this final section, having traveled the full distance of what was spoken today, is itself a declaration. It is the chosen one in you saying, without words, that you are not done, that the frequency has not gone so far beneath the surface that it cannot feel the pull of something true when it gets close enough, that you are still, despite everything, listening for the signal. I want to speak directly to your spirit now, before we close, because everything that has been said across these sections has been building toward this single point of arrival, and I do not want it to pass without being fully received. You were not chosen because you were the most polished, or the most prepared, or the most visibly qualified candidate for the life that was written for you before you drew your first breath. You were chosen because of what is in you at the level that cannot be manufactured, cannot be earned, and cannot be taken away by anything the world has thrown at you or will throw at you in the seasons ahead. The frequency you carry is not a reward for your performance. It is a fact of your design, and the crown that has been prepared for the life you are moving toward has had your name on it since before you had a name to put on anything. Let me pray with you right now, because some things need to be spoken into the atmosphere rather than simply understood in the mind, and this is one of them. Father, I bring before you the one who is hearing these words right now. In whatever state they arrived, in whatever season they are navigating, carrying whatever weight has accumulated across the years that brought them to this moment. You know their name. You know the specific texture of what they have lost and what they have survived and what they are still believing for, in the quiet places where no one else has been allowed to look. I ask you to do right now what only you can do: restore the frequency. Not gradually and not eventually, but now, in this breath, in this moment of their willing and open attention. Let the signal that was placed in them before they were formed begin to move again with the clarity and the power and the unmistakable authority of something that was never human in its origin. Let the fog lift. Let the knowing speak. Let the appointed time feel in their spirit closer than it has felt in a very long time. And let this moment, this ordinary moment, in the middle of an ordinary day, become the coordinate from which everything that was always intended for them begins to move toward them with speed and a specificity that leaves no room for doubt about who is responsible for it. In the name that is above every name, and with faith that does not require the evidence to arrive before it speaks. Amen. If something moved in you during that prayer, if something shifted even slightly in the quality of the air inside your chest, that was not imagination. That was the frequency responding. That was the signal, finding a gap in the static and moving through it. The way water finds the crack in stone, not because it forced its way, but because it was always going to find a way through eventually. You felt it because it is real, and because you are built to feel it, and because the layers of noise that have been sitting between you and it are, in this moment, slightly thinner than they were when you arrived here. This is the moment I want to speak about the genius wave one final time, not with the language of persuasion, but with the language of genuine care for what happens to you after this video ends. Because here is what I know from watching chosen ones move through seasons like yours. The moments of clarity and restored frequency that arrive during a message like this one are real, but they are also fragile in the immediate aftermath, vulnerable to the return of the familiar patterns of a brain that has been running on static for long enough that static feels normal. The morning after a moment of genuine shift is often when the fog tries hardest to return, when the familiar neural pathways reassert themselves, and the clarity of the night before begins to feel like something you imagined rather than something you experienced. The genius wave exists precisely for that morning. It exists for the 7 minutes between waking and full re-immersion in the noise of the day, when a precisely calibrated acoustic signal can hold the frequency that was open during a moment like this one and begin training the brain to Return to it not as an occasional visitor, but as a permanent resident. $39 through the link in the pinned comment below. 90 days to experience it. And if the experience does not match what every section of this message has described, every cent returned without question. This is not a closing sales pitch. This is a bridge between the moment of recognition you just had and the sustained restoration that the recognition was always intended to initiate. The link is there. The decision is yours. And whatever you decide, I want you to know that the frequency you felt move in you during this message is not dependent on any product to be real. It is real because it was placed in you by something no product created and nothing in this world can permanently extinguish. This channel is no longer monetized. We made that choice deliberately, and we have not regretted it. Because the moment this work became about revenue, it would have become about something other than you. We continue to make these videos because we believe with everything in us that these messages need to keep reaching the right people at the right moment, and that belief does not require a monetization toggle to sustain it. But it does require a community willing to help carry it forward. If you want to walk alongside us in keeping this journey alive, you can support the channel through a voluntary donation using the link in the pinned comment or in the channel description. We are grateful for every contribution, every prayer, and every share. Each one is felt, and none of them goes unnoticed. And if giving is not where you are right now, that is completely understood. Your presence here, your full attention, your comment left below, your decision to share this with one person who needs it. These things sustain us in ways that go beyond what any number could measure. If you have not yet liked this video, please do that now, not as a mechanical gesture, but as a recognition that something real happened here today and that you want to mark it as such. If you are not yet subscribed, this is your moment. The messages being prepared for the weeks ahead are being built for exactly the stage of the journey you are currently in, for the chosen ones who have heard their frequency named and are now navigating the terrain between recognition and full restoration. You will want to be here for what comes next, and ensures that the next word finds you the way this one did, at the right moment, with the right content, carrying the right frequency for where you are. Share this with one person today, not everyone. Not a broadcast, just one person whose face came to your mind during any section of this message, the one who is in their middle, the one whose silence has been going on long enough that they may have stopped telling people about it, the one who needs to hear that the signal is still there and that the crown has always had their name on it. Your act of sharing is not a social media action. It is a chosen one. Recognizing another chosen one, reaching back to offer the same hand that this message extended to you today. You are unshakable. You are unbreakable. You are chosen not for the easy version of this life, but for the full version, the one that includes the fire and the middle and the silence and the emergence, the one that could not have been built any other way than the exact way it has been built in you. The appointed time is real. The revelation is coming. And you, beloved, are the one it was always coming for. The crown has always had your name on it. Go wear it. You made it to the end of this message, and that matters more than you know. Take a breath right now, a real one, slow and full, and let what was spoken today settle into the places it was sent to reach. You do not need to have everything figured out by the time you close this video. You do not need to feel completely transformed or fully restored or entirely certain about what comes next. You only need to leave here knowing one thing more clearly than you knew it when you arrived. The frequency is still there. It has always been there, And the one who placed it in you has not, for a single moment across every season you have navigated, taken his eyes off the path you are walking. The appointed time is coming. The revelation will not delay. And you, chosen one, were always going to make it through.